Hi, so in the previous video we covered the CSS font properties, and in this video we're going to cover the CSS text properties, which are very related because they affect the way the text looks on the page. So I'm going to be using the same sample page and the same style sheet that I used in the previous video, and just in case you didn't see that or you forgot, the HTML page has 3 paragraphs on it, and only the one in the middle has the class of special. So by changing only the special class in my style sheet, we'll see the middle paragraph on the page change and the other paragraphs will stay the same. So the first property we'll look at is color, and I think you already know this very well, but if I go down to special and I change the color of only that paragraph, and let's say I'm going to make it a bright deep blue, so that would be 00C, and I save and I come over here and reload, and you can see that color has changed only for the paragraph with the class of special. I could also change the heading in the same way if I select the same line and add it to the H1, save, reload, and now my heading is blue. So the next thing we will look at is the CSS property line height, and you must use the hyphen as you see it here. This will add more space between lines, or you could also make less space between lines. So let's see how that works. I'm going to change the line height just for my paragraph with the class of special, and I'm going to make it 200% so it's very obvious, all right? So I will save, I will reload, and you can see what it did, right? So if you didn't understand, the height of the line changes the amount of space between the lines. And if I go back in and I make it smaller than 100%, let's say just 80%, and we will save and we will reload, and you can see that while that is not very attractive, sometimes you might want to reduce that space between the lines. Next, we're going to add some letter spacing to our special paragraph. So it's another text property that needs to have a hyphen. And we will think about, I want it to look not too horrible, but, well, it's going to look pretty horrible. I'm going to add an entire M and show you what that looks like. So remember the measurement MEM, it's the width of a capital letter M in that font. So I will save, I will reload, and even without zooming in, you can tell that is pretty terrible looking, right? Let's make this much better and put 0 point in front of that M. So now instead of a whole M, we are saying it is 1/10 of an M, that measurement. So save and reload. It still looks a bit weird. This is not very beautiful, but you get the idea that with some fonts, and particularly sometimes when the font size is larger, it might be nice, it might be attractive to add some letter spacing. Now, word spacing is entirely different. Word spacing is never really beautiful. All right, so let's make that really big to begin with. I'm going to say word spacing 4 M's, so that would be as much space as 4 capital letter M's. Save and reload, and you see what the difference is between letter spacing and word spacing, right? Space between letters, space between words. And even if we make that relatively small, 1M, right? So you might think, oh, 1 letter, that's not so bad. But reload that, it really doesn't look good. So I can say I have never ever used word spacing, but who knows? Maybe there might be a time when you would want to use it. Next, we're going to look at the CSS property text align, and this is so misused by people who don't have design training. Okay, so first let's look at the default for paragraphs, and in fact the default for headings and everything. The default for browsers is to have everything aligned left and ragged on the right side. That translates into align left. So you don't have to tell your text to be align left because it already is. That'll be the default. And most important, it is easy to read because the word spacing that you just learned about is proper. There's not too much of a gap between the words, and your eye always returns to the left side for the next new line, and you can go down and you don't get lost. When you mess with alignment, you can mess up the ease of reading. So we'll start with text align center. Not recommended for paragraph text in most cases. So save, reload, and when you look at this paragraph close up, the problem is that it is harder for your brain to come around to the left side and find the next line that comes after the one you just finished reading. It slows people down. It's not considered kind to your audience. So a large centered heading doesn't interfere with the reading experience, but a centered paragraph is considered really poor design. So we avoid that. Next, we'll try align right. And while that might be good beside a photograph that's over on the right side, let's reload and look at that. We have the same problem. When we go back to the left, when our eye goes over there, it just makes reading more difficult. So again, we rarely use text align right, but we can use it. It's available to us. Finally, the worst of all, align justify. I would be comfortable saying never ever use this for anything on the web. Now, books and magazines can have justified left and right, and I'll show you what this looks like. Save and reload. But what happens on the web, because the typography is not the same as typography printed on paper, we get larger gaps between words than we really should, because the web browser just can't correct for this justifying on the left and on the right. So it does not make the text inside the paragraph look good, although you may feel the edges look good. Avoid align justify. It is not preferred by professional web designers. Okay, we've got 4 of the text properties in CSS left, and text decoration you've already seen when we went over the pseudo classes. When you are styling links, sometimes you want to take the underline off, and for that you use text decoration. You can also use text decoration to add an underline to something. So we will add it to our special paragraph. Underline, save, reload. But you are cautioned to never underline anything on the web that is not a link. And why? Think about it. It's confusing. When you see an underline on the web, you expect the thing to be a link. So really, we don't use it much for that. We do use it to take the underline off, in which case you would say text decoration, none. There is another thing that you might like to do sometime, and that is the value of, what is it? Line, yes, line through. And that can be pretty neat if you're making some kind of correction in some kind of professional copy and you want to make it clear that it was rewritten. So if we go over here and reload, line through can look kind of neat. It's kind of a special thing. You wouldn't want to use it that often. I'm going to go through the last 3 text properties without coming back to the slide. So sometimes we use text transform when we want to ensure that something is all uppercase. Now, normally this would be some kind of heading, not a whole paragraph, because making things all uppercase in a paragraph makes it harder to read. Just uppercase letters, difficult for the brain to differentiate. So your choices, uppercase will make everything a capital letter. And we'll go over here and we'll reload. And so I think you can see it's not as easy to read. For the other options for text transform, I don't think I have ever used those. Now, text indent. This is tricky and I would urge you not to use it. You'll see what it looks like. Save, reload. There is no reason to indent the paragraph when there's a line space between the paragraphs. We like the line space between the paragraphs because it makes the text more readable when we're scrolling. So you don't want to eliminate the line space, and because of the line space, you do not want to have this indent. However, there is a neat little thing. If we make it minus, and maybe not -5, -2m, save, reload. All right, now that's not so good, but you can make this a rather nice hanging indent if you also make the margin on that same side left wider. So for a -2m hanging indent, you would make a margin left of 2m and reload. And you can see that there might be times when you want to style your paragraphs that way. Last but not least, we have the text shadow. Now, there are designers who really get into making these shadows really, really cool. I'm going to put one on our H1, and I've already set it up. The first two measurements, which I have as 0.1m, one is the offset to the side, and the other one is the offset to the bottom. And so if you didn't have any offset, your text shadow would be hidden behind the text and you couldn't see it. The third value that you have to put in is a color, and I've selected a color of blue that goes with the background of my page. So I will save, I will reload this, and you can see that this may not exactly look like a perfect shadow, but the colors can act up a little bit oddly. You have to kind of fool around if you want to check shadow. If it's worth it to you, go ahead and play with it. But I would say at this stage, you don't really need to learn much about text shadows. That is the 9 elements that are not using the word font in the property name that we use with CSS to style our text and paragraphs and headings on our web pages.